there's been, at least at this point, 10 or maybe more actually, we might even say up to 15 years of research on the mechanisms of compassion training.
Right.
And so, to me, I think how I often teach this is, of course, that, it has to do with stress and coping with social stress. So, stress, as I usually teach, it doesn't just live. We hear about fight, flight, pain, freeze. We think about the autonomic nervous system,
Yeah.
the brainstem, right? The reptilian brain, blah, blah, blah. But of course, stress doesn't just live in the oldest part of the brain or in the autonomic nervous system. It exists at all levels of the nervous system. In particular, at all levels of the nervous system, there are networks that are there for self-protective reasons, for the conservative networks that are self-enclosing typically, that focus on, okay, I need to be very vigilant and careful. I need to look out for myself and in different ways, whether that's cognitively worrying or it's emotionally being in fear and maybe hurt or longing or whatever. And then at the level of the autonomic or visceral nervous system, being reactive, being ready to flight, faint, or freeze at the moment, at a moment's notice. So compassion training operates mainly in the middle there on the limbic system or the emotional brain.
Right.
And in the emotional brain, as in all these other areas of the brain, as I like to teach it, there isn't just one network, which is self-enclosing. There's another network, which is prosocial. Right. So the network or the capacity that's prosocial at the limbic level, when we feel safely connected, we relate to others in a mood and with the intentionality and experience of care. And so some people call it the care system. Some people call it the empathy system. It's there, okay? But on the other hand, so is the salience network, which is anchored in the amygdala, and this is there as a kind of early warning self-protective system to scan the body language, facial expressions, vocal tone of the animals around us. And so our first instinct, given our survival bias or negativity bias, is we're constantly hypervigilant, scanning for distress. And when we find it, it triggers our mirror neurons and our mirror reaction. Like, in other words, you're anxious, I'm anxious. You're angry, I'm angry. And it's a survival reflex. Like if your fellow deer is getting a little fidgety, there might be a lion over there. So you want to stop and think about, like, why is my fellow deer getting fidgety? You're just going to get anxious, and you're going to get ready to run, just like your fellow deer is getting ready to run. So unfortunately, that means that unless we do something, we're wired to live in fear and totally all caught up in other people's distress in such a way that it's constantly stirring up our own distress. Right. So this is why, like, somebody, Jean-Paul Sartre might have said, hell is other people.
Right. A little glib, but I know what you mean.
From a Buddhist point of view, yes, hell is other people. Heaven is also other people.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And so really, actually, hell is really a way of being connected that's based in fear and isolation and self-enclosure. Heaven is a way of being connected that's based in compassion and security, confidence, care. So what we found in this in meditation research is that compassion training, as little as 5 or 6 sessions of compassion training, and for a group of undergraduates, is enough to transform the way they're processing, viewing the stressed faces of people who are suffering.
Right.
To transform it from the subliminal, what I call sympathetic distress, like what some people call social contagion, the sort of unconscious subliminal, you're anxious, I'm anxious, into, well, you're anxious, I know what that feels like, but I'm okay, and how can I help, right? And that simple shift of being mindful of our feelings as rather than kind of reifying them or getting co-opted or hijacked by them, recognizing that they're about sympathy for someone else or empathy for someone else,
Mm.
that allows us to engage this higher care system, which calms our fears, and actually enables the elements of the empathy network, including the anterior cingulate, the
Mm.
nucleus cumbens, you know, the medial prefrontal cortex, and so on. All of these parts of the system, and even actually the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex in some studies. These are all, you know, I you know I feel distress, but it's not mine. It's yours. I'm feeling, and I
Yeah.
don't, and I'm not threatened. I'm safe because I'm connected to you and care.
Mm.
What can I do to help? And
Right.
that actually, instead of stimulating burnout, right, or compassion fatigue or vicarious
Yeah.
trauma, social contagion, it stimulates the internal reward system
Right.
and what we call compassion satisfaction, that deep sense of the meaningful. This is the kind of satisfaction that positive psychology has found leads
Mm.
to longevity, well-being, healthy immunity, and healing, and all the other things. So,
Right.
so this practice, probably more than any other, I think, is probably the single most important um, first aid that we
Mm.
need to be living in the crazy, dysfunctional
Yeah.
world we live in. And that's why, I included it as, central. I
Yeah.
think 7-point mind training is a beautiful, there are similar things in the Catholic tradition, actually, like the St.
Mm.
Francis prayer and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. But the uh, 7-point mind training, is more rigorous and deeper, both philosophically or
Mm.
cognitively, in terms of the cognitive dimension of compassion,
Yeah.
and in terms of the emotional uh, cues or guidance or
Yeah.
pointers that we need to be really resilient in compassion training.
Right. Right. Yeah. I remember it was a huge eye opener for me when I was doing the cultivating emotional balance teacher training. It was developed by Paul Ekman and Alan Wallace. There, they also mentioned these similar studies with people like Mathieu Ricard, the monk who spent many years in retreat practicing these sort of things, and just seeing how if he would just be experiencing the suffering of another person, the pain centers are activating, it's distressing. But the moment he activates the compassion, which is sort of the wish to alleviate that, immediately you see, as you said, you see the pleasure centers activate, and there's this activation, and it's actually calming, strangely enough, to the system. Which, yeah, I think, as you said, it's something that we all need in a world where so much is going on all the time. I mean, if you watch the news at all, you're just overwhelmed if you're not careful. And even if you don't watch the news, everyone's stressed. So, yeah, it's a really necessary method as far as